Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Paul Strasser.
Good morning. I certainly hope you are ready for an action-packed day today and tonight. ELC is only possible because of strong support and financial contributions of our member companies. Last night, we recognized our Byte and Platinum sponsors. This morning, we want to acknowledge our Gold and Silver sponsors. As I read your name, please stand so we can thank you. The Gold sponsors are Airwatch, Khaki, CDWG, Centuria, CSC, Deloitte, Davis, DRC, Evolver, Harris, Hughes, IBM, Juniper, Level 3, National Government Services, Noblesse, Raytheon, Verizon. Please join me in thanking them. Our silver sponsors this year are shown on the screen, and I will not read all the names here. So please, thank you to the silver sponsors. It is now my pleasure to introduce Lena Trudeau, Associate Commissioner of Innovation at GSA's Office for Strategic Innovation in the Federal Acquisition Service. She, with the help of 3 presidential fellows, are going to walk us through several demonstrations this morning. They're going to discuss the importance of agility in the success of the Presidential Innovation Fellows projects. Additionally, they're going to talk about how projects are helping government determine how to manage all their investments, how to assess risk when making decisions about technology, services, and ideas to invest in, and how to get the desired return on investment. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lena Trudeau.
Thank you. Thanks so much. How is everybody this morning? Excellent. I love the DC community. Everybody's like wide awake and ready to go at 7 a.m. It's fantastic. Okay, so almost wide awake and ready to go. Before we get started and dive into the content that we want to share with you about some of the projects we've been working on, I thought I'd take a moment and just very briefly introduce the 3 folks we have here on stage with me. I think you're meeting them for the very first time. These are 3 people out of 43 total Presidential Innovation Fellows that we have working on projects with us right now for 18 different agencies. They were chosen out of a sea of applications that numbered over 3,000. And they're very accomplished individuals that bring a really unique skill set to some of the longstanding challenges we've been facing in government. And so I thought I'd just take a moment and give you a snippet. Adam Dole was, before coming into the program, an entrepreneur in residence for the Mayo Clinic. And he worked on really trying to bring healthcare and technology together in order to increase engagement, increase consumer outcomes, really focus on results in the healthcare arena, and it's something he's really passionate about. Adam is working with HHS on the Blue Button Initiative, which is called a My Data Initiative, and he'll tell you more about that when he has the chance to speak. Next to Adam is Vidya Spandana, and Vidya is an advisor and consultant to many corporations on issues of entrepreneurship and innovation and use of technology. But I'd like to tell you a snippet about a project that Vidya did when she was an undergrad. With a team of 5 people, Vidya stood up DMV.org, which is a platform that's still used today by more than 110 million Americans to access information, products, and services around their motor vehicle issues and licensing. And she's worked on a lot of other ventures since then, but I just keep thinking back to that one example. It provided so many foundational lessons for the work that she's doing today with Millennium Challenge Corporation, where she's working with folks at MCC to improve outcomes in global development. And she'll talk a little bit about that. And then next to Vidya is Greg Godbout. And Greg is an entrepreneur on more than one level. He doesn't only work with technology, although he is a software architect. And he's worked with VA, he's worked with NARA, he's implemented large-scale social software in those organizations, and that's, I think, impressive in its own right. He's also a small business owner, and he brings a unique perspective from being a small business owner. He's the owner of the Arlington Draft House and Cinema, which might be handy when you're running a fellowship program. Yeah, that's awesome.
Thank you.
And Greg is working on innovating procurement, and he's partnered with SBA and the Office of Federal Procurement Policy in the work that he's doing there. So maybe just by way of setup, I'll say this one final thing, and then I'll let the real stars of the show speak. It is high time, and we've been talking about this at ELC for a number of years, that we look to do things very, very differently than we've done them in the past. We do not have an 18-month or a 2-year cycle to produce software based on requirements that we gather, develop in silos, and then pull together towards the end. We really need more collaboration, more partnership, greater agility, more openness, peer review of code. Some of the things that we all know ought to be more standard than they are in the work that we do. And I think the reason I'm particularly excited about having the morning opening, and thank you, by the way, very much to ACT-IAC for all the work you've done in setting this up, but having the morning opening session here is because of the agenda that we have over the next 2 days, where we're talking about driving results, we're talking about lean, data, use of technology, innovation. We hope to show you some work that's been done in a very short amount of time. These fellows came on board with us June 17th of this year, so everything you see has been developed since that time. And it is possible to do this work, to do it very well, to focus on outcomes, to be engaging and collaborative in doing it and build partnerships in doing it, but to do it fast and to do it inexpensively and to do it right. So without any further ado, Adam, why don't you talk to us a little bit about Blue Button?
Well, thank you, Lena. I appreciate the kind introduction. And it's a pleasure to be here this morning, and it's an honor for all of us to be able to share our stories and the work that we're doing in the Presidential Innovation Fellows Program. And as Lena mentioned, I'm working with the Department of Health and Human Services on a project called Blue Button. And Blue Button, in its simplest form, is really about empowering all people with electronic medical records. And this, just a little aside, it's one thing for it to be human readable, but we're also going to talk a little bit later about the importance of it being machine readable as well. I'm not going to assume that everybody here is on the same page with what's going on in our healthcare system right now, so I'm going to spend a slide or two just sharing a little bit of context and why Blue Button is important right now. Americans are living longer. This is in part due to a lot of the advancements in technology and medicine, and we have a lot to give thanks for a lot of the work that's being done. But unfortunately, just because Americans are living longer, we're not necessarily living healthier. And this is actually causing a lot of downstream effects on our healthcare system. A lot of us are familiar with the fact that we're in a healthcare crisis right now. And if anyone in this room has ever interacted with the healthcare system, you know what I'm talking about. You know that it can be a very frustrating experience. It can be a very cold experience. Patients oftentimes don't fit in the current model of healthcare, which is sad and ironic. And so when we actually take an objective view of our healthcare system and we look at where the majority of a lot of the costs are coming from, we know that a big part of them could actually be prevented. And when we think about the importance of engagement in this idea that 75% of our costs could be prevented, our healthcare crisis starts to look a lot more like an engagement crisis. And this is a really important frame for the importance of getting patients and consumers to be an equal member of their healthcare team. And the first step in this process is allowing patients to have access to their records. Without access to their records and without a way to have interoperable data between systems, patients are going to be hindered and not able to take full responsibility and engagement over their own health. So a lot of people are actually saying that patients are going to be the blockbuster drug of the century. I would argue that a connected patient to their data and the healthcare system could be the blockbuster drug of the 21st century. And so if those of you who are Seinfeld fans in the audience might remember this episode where Elaine asked to see her records. And it was an awkward conversation at best, and she was eventually labeled as difficult. And while this is comical and somewhat funny, I think it does mirror the paternalistic sense that the healthcare system has had over the last 50, 100 years. In fact, most of the biggest healthcare institutions have spent the last 50, 100 years trying to protect their data, protect the patient from their data, and making sure that the data doesn't leave their system. And for the first time in history, we have some modifications to the HIPAA guidelines that are actually empowering patients and encouraging patients because it is their right to ask for their own data. And so that's a really exciting shift that's happening right now that we're taking advantage with Blue Button. And so Blue Button is really about two things. At its core, it's about the symbol of a growing movement that makes it okay for patients to ask for their data. This is a really important shift at a philosophical level that is happening not only within government and starting with the VA, Blue Button was a side project within the VA many years ago and has now been adopted by Health and Human Services. And now we are spreading this philosophical alignment that it is now okay for patients to ask, and in fact, they're going to be encouraged. And the second piece of Blue Button that we see as part of our deliverable to the country is really a standardized, structured format for health data. And this is, again, both human readable, but also it's important that it's machine readable, because it is not enough that patients just simply have access to their data. They need to be able to take it outside of their system and use it with any third-party system or any third-party app or other healthcare system that they happen to need to engage with, and this is really important. We have over 100 million Americans now that are having a Blue Button experience in some way, shape, or form with their healthcare data. And this is really exciting, because if it wasn't for this structured format, it would be very difficult for anybody to be able to develop services that are making this data available to individuals. So whether they're pharmacies, they're labs, they're healthcare institutions, they're healthcare insurance companies, 100 million people now have access to their healthcare records in a format that allows them to start engaging. However, we know that just simply access to your data is not enough. And so it's really important on the Blue Button project, and something that we're doing is making it real for people, making it actionable, making this data actionable so that people can have a better experience in their daily lives. And I'm going to share just a couple of examples of what I mean by that. The first is, when you now give access to and have the ability to see inside of your health record, you might notice some inconsistencies or errors. Now, the healthcare institutions don't like to claim that there's errors, but I think having a workflow and having the ability for patients to be able to raise their hand and say, actually, I think there's an inconsistency here, let's talk about that. Having some pilots around that is really going to be important, and we're working with the VA right now to enable that two-way communication in a machine-readable format so that there's a new workflow involved. The second use case that we're talking about, or pilot experience, is, gosh, we've all been in an emergency situation. Wouldn't it be great if we had our healthcare records at the right time, at the right place, whether it's for us or a loved one? We know the importance of this, and we know what happens in the absence of this. These are real lives at stake, and I think for the first time, we're actually able to empower people to have the healthcare data on them or about their family members when they need it. Access to medication and prescriptions. This is a really important touch point for consumers, because I think there's some crazy stat out there that says everybody in America has, or 70% of America has a Walgreens within a couple of miles of them. These are the touch points that people experience on a daily, weekly, monthly basis when they're sick or when they're just going about their daily lives, and we need to be able to take advantage of them. So we're piloting some opportunities with some of the largest pharmacies in the country as well, again, to make this data available to them in a useful format. If you've ever had an explanation of benefits document after getting some care, this slide doesn't need any more explanation. But we're working with some of the largest payers to reimagine the experience of an EOB that is actually consumer friendly. And lastly, if you've ever moved from state to state, I think you know the challenges of trying to get your health records and specifically your vaccination records to follow you. And in fact, there's some laws out there that prevent states from talking to each other around this data. And so we're using consumer technology and third-party apps to actually make this happen. In fact, there's an app called iBlueButton, and they just announced a pilot with the state of California to enable these types of interactions to happen more seamlessly. So we're really excited about a lot of the growth that we're seeing in our private-public partnership around BlueButton. Lastly, we're also developing some software and a tool that we think is going to be really important, and we're calling this the connector, and it's going to launch sometime in mid-January. And one thing we realized when we talked to people was that now that they're getting access to their data, they don't really understand where they can go to get it or what data exists about them. It's scattered throughout a pretty fragmented ecosystem, and so we saw a need and an opportunity to create a tool that allows them to identify where their data exists in the system and actually lead them through the process of acquiring that data and then making some recommendations about some BlueButton-enabled third-party services that can take that data and make it really actionable. So we're really excited about a lot of the work that we're doing with BlueButton, and I think this is the first step in helping to shift things in our healthcare system to really empower patients to really be an equal member of their healthcare team. Thank you.
Pardon me, I thought I had these all in full screen before we started. There we go.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you. Yeah, good morning. So I'll be speaking a little bit about my experience as an innovation fellow with the Millennium Challenge Corporation. Just a quick background, Millennium Challenge Corporation is a small government agency that's dedicated to ending global poverty through economic growth. It's a global development agency that is limited to about 300 employees. So I'd like to start with this image. I really love this picture. It's a photo of the sunrise on Earth from the International Space Station. And the reason why I love this picture so much is that it provides a new perspective, a completely different way of looking at something that we see every single day, a different way of looking at something that we need and use every single day. So it also is an image for me that resonates with the Innovation Fellow program because I feel like we're brought here to kind of do something similar. Bring new perspectives on something that we use and need every single day, and leverage the best of technologies to get the best of government. So with that inspiration, about 5 months ago, I moved everything from California to DC. I said goodbye to my family and friends and put my business on hold to start this adventure. And I was very fired up. I mean, it's ridiculous, but this is exactly how I felt. I couldn't sleep. I was very, very stoked to really achieve what my mission was. And there were two parts of my mission. One was to leverage the Millennium Challenge Corporation's data, publicly available data, to engage the private sector into investing in the poorest countries in the world. How can we use this data that's already created and available to help increase the economic output of these countries? Which was a very big lift for me, but also very exciting. The other element of it, which was much harder, was to get the entire agency believing in their own data. Most of the people didn't think that they had anything good. So I had to first see that there was something good and then convince the rest of them that it was worth it. So I started it off sunshine and rainbows. I'd negotiated a small budget for myself, and I was really excited to have a developer and a designer to work with. I'm not a developer now, so I needed that support. Because it's a small agency, I was also expecting agency-wide commitment and support around all things open data. And I was especially excited about this treasure trove of new data that they promised me that had immense potential for the private sector in these countries. So I couldn't wait to get my hands on it. But in a couple of weeks, reality hit. And this might be preaching to the choir. I'm sure for me it was a big shock, that moment of panic. But I didn't end up receiving any money, and there was absolutely nobody available to support this effort and this big giant, and to reach this big giant goal of helping generate economies in the poorest countries of the world. The other piece that hurt is that I didn't actually have access to this treasure trove of data, and I still don't have access to it. They promised me that it exists somewhere in the building, but I haven't seen it yet. The last element was that my tool was going to be this data catalog, which I'll talk about later, which is what I will be using to engage with the developers and the private sector and all the people who are using the data. But that was going to be my tool. And there was a lot of annoyance and irritation from everybody that I met with at the beginning. They didn't totally understand why it was there. Now, the other element of the reality was that I had an amazing agency sponsor. So the CFO of MCC was incredibly supportive, and with her help, I finally got a chance to really dig deep into the agency and find a few people that were supportive. And there was more reality that hit. So since I didn't have much support inside the agency, I looked outside and was shocked to find that there really wasn't that much interagency collaboration, and I thought there would be channels already there available for me, but that wasn't the case. The data catalog that I was supposed to use as my magic wand was broken, and it just didn't work. And there was surprising a lot of suspicion of the private sector within the global development space. So getting them to understand that, hey, you have this awesome data that companies could use, immediately created a valley in that relationship. And the hardest part was the institutional inertia, to get people to even care about what we were doing. And to care about it, you kind of have to understand it. And to understand it, you have to have a little bit of patience. And that was very hard to find. And the worst of it was that the last person I wanted to get any attention from was the general counsel. And I had a lot of friends in that department. So it peaked at this point where I got this comment relatively frequently at the end of meetings. Just write it all down, come back 6 months later, and we'll talk about it. And we persevered. I did find some amazing, amazing people within the agency and outside the agency, both in the private sector as well as other agencies. And with this scrappy team of really committed individuals who had full-time jobs, who had lots of other things that were priorities on their plate, we made some accomplishments happen that none of us thought were possible. So I want to tell you the story of one of those accomplishments, that data catalog that was so broken. So a quick background, data catalog is basically just a website that has a user interface that makes it easy for people and machines to have access to MCC's publicly available data. So it should have APIs, and it should have just a user interface for people to search for the data and find it. And that didn't exist. So we decided that we were going to build it. And here are the goals that we wanted to make sure we achieved. We wanted to be easy to use, easy to maintain for the agency, and provide machine-readable access. The final piece was we wanted to have a community hub where we could post content and articles about what we were doing. So we built it, we redesigned the front end of the data catalog, we installed a database management system, we built an enterprise API, which is a pretty forward step in this global development space. Nobody had an enterprise API. And then the final content management system. And it took a lot of support and collaboration from everybody else because one of the unique things about my experience is that I was the only fellow on this project, whereas other projects had a team assigned to them. So I needed to rely on the others to get any kind of help. A lot of help from the open source community, and then relying on what I knew best, rapid prototyping, iterative, agile, lean development, and a lot of hard work, imagination, and curiosity. What it didn't take, I want to just iterate, is a lot of time. It just took a lot of curiosity and imagination. So we got quotes and this isn't a complete quote for all the work that we did. This is just to install the enterprise API, one install of an open source freely available database management system, maintain one install of WordPress, and then a user interface. And this is what we were told it would cost us. And it would take about a year. And this is what we ended up spending. So let's just take a moment and realize that that's craziness. This is insanity. This just cannot be. One other reason for it, why this is crazy, is that this isn't a giant, crazy, big project. I mean, it really isn't even a very important project in the grand scheme of global development. This is very important for MCC, but for the world, kind of. So I want to kind of go through that. The Dynamic Enterprise API, we used open source API that was already developed by the Department of Transportation, and we tweaked it and made it ours, and we're going to put it back out onto the web for other people to use. And that took us about a couple weeks. The installation of the open source DMS, we did it in about an hour, and we did it by clicking a button. One CMS installation, we got an intern to do it in about 2 hours. And the quote was 82 full-time employees. I mean, that's craziness. Improved user interface, what we did was relied on other agencies' experiences and their data catalogs, and lots of people have done research. Lots of agencies have put in money to get consultations and analysis done on their experience, and we used all of those reports to help inform our better improved interface. So one thing I also want to point out is that the money here isn't really the point. The point here is that we're getting ripped off. And that's something I want to call attention to. Because $100,000, maybe in the grand scheme of things, doesn't really matter that much for all of US government spending. But the fact that it ought to be zero is where it should kind of sting. So we didn't stop there. Our team worked to develop a new data set that we released, which brought MCC now. We were ranked last week to be the most transparent global development aid donor in the world. And that was an effort that we pulled off in about a month of work. This positions not just MCC, little MCC, but all of US government as a leader in open aid and transparency. And that's a big win for a very little effort. This week, we are collecting together about 70 different government leaders, business leaders, and tech experts to collaborate in London on some of the biggest challenges that they are facing in global development, using technologies and solutions around open data. So what is so great about this is that this was an idea we threw around over a couple beers about 3 months ago. And it's massive. I mean, it turned into something very big. We have a slot with the Open Government Partnership, which is an annual conference of government leaders. And the biggest piece of this is that it was an interagency collaboration. We had the White House, NSS, USDA, State Department, USAID. I mean, all of us were working together very well, actually, very efficiently to pull this off in a short amount of time. And I'm very excited about this. So the original point of why I even started this job was to showcase the value of MCC data in private partnerships with private companies. And we succeeded. We have 3 pilots using MCC data that is available. So even though I didn't get to see the treasure, I used what we had and found really compelling uses for that data. So one example is Ernst & Young is using MCC data to help consult with its clients to engage them to invest in these countries. So that whole thing about getting investment in the poorest countries in the world, we've done it. Same goes with IBM and Palantir. And finally, we started conversations with 40 of the leading investors in Africa, where MCC is especially focused, on understanding what kinds of needs they have in helping them manage their investments and helping them decrease risk, and what kind of information they need from the global development community. So this is sort of our customer development, understanding what they need so that we could then go back to the global development world and talk to the agencies and say, let's see what you have to help increase the investment in these countries that we all care about. So finally, I just want to leave one point in that, within the program, we talk a lot about big change, and we're in our own little bubble. So we might talk about big waves coming, and you might just feel them as ripples. But in the past 4 months, 5 months, from what I've seen inside the US government and outside, I can't imagine how big it's going to be. There's a giant groundswell movement to revolutionize IT in the government as we know it. So with that, thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to talk about movies. So, just kidding. As she mentioned before, my name's Greg. I'm one of the team members working on a project in innovation procurement, and some people may know it as RFP Easy. Our situation was somewhat unique in that we walked into this program and had a previous group that had already developed the first pilot. So we were coming in to iterate it, do the next version of that project, and then you'll hear some common themes of the agile process and sort of what it by its nature makes you do, right? In good ways, not makes you do in bad ways. But do we want to start? There we go, okay. So week one, just like everybody else in the PIF program, you get started and you are so thrilled. It is like the most exciting thing. You really, deep down, if you weren't admitting it out loud, you were like, we're gonna save the world. This is what we're doing. And everybody was so excited. And as you can imagine, I don't get too much into it, but as the weeks go on, the reality of the bureaucracy hits you and the enormity of it. And then there's like some weeks of depression. And then if things went well, if you did your job right, if things went, they start to pick back up. And I'll sort of explain a little bit of that. So one of the reasons you were so excited and all of us were so excited is we knew these certain things, that rapid prototyping, and if anyone's heard of the lean startup before, that model, which is really an agile business development process, this was the methodology we were going to come in. We didn't really know what we were going to do, right? We just knew how we were going to do it. And a picture's worth 1,000 words, but a pilot is worth a million. So the goal was to get to pilots as quick as possible, get them in the hands of users so that you could really learn find out if your hypothesis was true. And for the round one PIFs who worked on RFP Easy, they got a really big win. They have a very strong marketplace, and the right type of innovative, disruptive companies were part of that marketplace. They came in and had 30% savings on bids compared to Fed Biz Ops. And so that's the little fist bump there. It's like, good job, all right, this was great. We moved it forward. Unfortunately, inside the federal government, the response was a little less welcoming of the software. And this was really for two reasons. One, the software was built as sort of like you had to use each stage. It was quickly piloted. They literally built it in a basement, released it, see what people thought of it. But you had to use every component of it in order to get into the marketplace. And I can tell you, the government was right. It was annoying. It was not developed the way if I was a procurement person would want to see. And the other thing that is true is the federal government's not used to agile development. So the concept that you would get software and it's bad, the expression you would get, and we heard this 100 times, is great, another broken piece of software I have to log into and use, right? And what we repositioned it as saying, no, this is really a test. It's a hypothesis. If this works, we want to pull components out of it and maybe affect your current system. So the whole anytime in the government, it was usually a waterfall process that by the time they got it, they didn't have a lot of say in it, and then they had to work with it. And in this situation, we were ready to iterate, and it blew their mind in many cases that how fast we were able to iterate. I mean, like sometimes it was 3 hours we had an update out. Most of the times it was between 24 and 48. And eventually you started to see they were like, oh, so we can actually affect change and see it immediately. So to get started on what that next iteration would be, we had 30 meetings in 6 weeks with 120 procurement professionals across 18 agencies. Now this is significant because if we were the first to come in and do innovation in procurement, coming in without anything to show, we would not have been able to get all of these meetings in such a short period of time. But in many ways, because of the slight controversy inside the government of that first round, these meetings were getting set up like rapid fire. Everybody wanted to essentially give us their opinion of the software. And we were able to take those meetings and turn them into, well, what would you want it to be? And so we collected all that data. We went back, and then we had an interesting situation which not a lot of other teams were faced with, because we were so early into this, and we were told by, in our situation, this idea of RFP Easy was initiated by the SBA. Our salaries were paid by the SBA. We, on a regular basis, sort of answered to or reported to OFPP and OMB. Yet we were housed at the GSA and had GSA IDs and all this stuff. So, I don't know how many stakeholders or people we had to answer to, but we were, as a team, had this 1 week we were sitting there going, this needs to really change, and will they allow it, right? Like, is this really agile? Because we were going to come up with a big pivot of this prized system, and would they allow it? And the good news is, and I love this quote, it's not what you do first, it's what you do next. And it's very important. You just learn, adapt, and adjust. And yes, they allowed us to do it. And that pivot was called procurement as a service. So what we figured was, and I described it to people as like, it seems to me there's a lot of systems out there and there's a lot of ways people do it, and each agency seems to do it a little bit differently. So you could go into each agency and take a glass and fill it with marbles, and those marbles are the existing software tools or procedures in which they do procurement. But there's a whole lot of gaps in between, and what we wanted to do was come in and be sand, just pour sand between those marbles, fill up that whole glass, right? And that was our theory around procurement as a service, what we needed to do is build tools that fit within the way people work and iterate it from there. And it was very positive and moved forward. And I'm going to go through four of the products that we were able to get delivered in a pilot format. And I want you to know before I go through them that the one fear you have when you're excited in the beginning is, what's going to happen when I'm gone? 6 months, my stuff's going to just die somewhere. And all of these products you're about to see have funding and permanent agency teams that are supporting them from this point forward. So that's probably the thing we're most excited about, is that we live on, through these tools. So the first one is off of the RFP Easy model, and it's the idea of a simplified marketplace. And so the theory behind this was, if a new innovative business, probably small business, wanted to do business with the federal government, the storyline goes something like this. They think about it after dinner, maybe they have kids, they put the kids to bed, they stay up late, and they decide to go to FBA or FedBizOps and start reading procurements and say, well, we're going to do it. And then they search for web development in quotes, and nothing comes up. And they can't figure out what's going on there. And so they get frustrated, and then they find something that looks like a web system, but it's actually programming for laundry machines at military bases. And they're like, I do web development. Where is web development? And by the third 77-page proposal, they quit, right? And their mindset, government doesn't want me to do business with me, I don't want to do business with them, and they walk away. But the reality was, as many of us know, who I've had many years working in government IT as well, or federal government IT as well, the reality is what they were looking for was just the descriptive paragraph of what this is. And what we found in IT services particularly, because that's where we were focusing, is roughly about 55% of all the IT services listings in FedBizOps don't have a description in the synopsis, okay? And that's not the fault of the software, right? Like, that's data entry, data problems, right? So we thought, let's go ahead and start every day we'll review new IT services projects that come through. Let's pull out that paragraph, list it in RFP Easy, and give them an easy page that they can scan through. And right now we have about 1,200 companies on this, most of whom are looking to engage with the federal government or, for the first time, or they're like 1 or 2 contracts in. So we've had great results with that, driving lots of traffic. The other types of simplified listings, we have simplified bidding. So you see like the colored ones here are featured bidding, featured like easy bidding. One of the interesting stories though that I want to point out, and there's a lot of them, but there was a group, an agency who wanted to get a design done for Drupal. And a templated design for Drupal is pretty simple to do. And so they put this procurement through RFP Easy. It got awarded, and since then has been delivered, and it was highly acclaimed. The winning award was $20,000 for all the work. They did a great job. What was interesting, though, is during the process, we didn't know how they were going to do the job or stuff like that, and I was debriefing with the contracts officer. And the contracts officer was a little nervous because what she deemed as reputable companies were coming in with bids between $100,000 and $150,000. And it made her nervous. Did we write the proposal wrong? Did we, what was the situation? Was this company that's doing it for $20,000 going to absolutely embarrass us, and it's not going to be a good project? I mean, there were legitimate worries. It's great that the story comes out at the end that the product was delivered and it was nice and they're very happy and they would love to work with that company again. But I want everyone to sort of think for a second. The learning lesson for that contracts officers and those teams is, what do they think now about those companies that came in and bid $100,000 to $150,000 for design services on a highly used templated website? Another product we came up with we call FB Open. Now this one's an important one. This was inspired by work with, I think Naven is over there. Thank you, Naven. One of the things that the most encouraging things is that our team found is through these meetings we started meeting people, like-minded teams, and some of the inspiration about the big changes coming is because these teams are all over government. In the beginning you sort of feel like we're this maverick PIF team and we're going to do all this stuff, but the reality is we just find these other teams and it sort of gives you hope because we're leaving, right? And they're staying on and working with those teams. And so one of the things we thought about was, the search on FedBizOps isn't very good. I talked about the quotes and the web development. And so we thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting to just index FedBizOps using new open source technologies and stuff like that? And so what this tool is going to be, it's going to be open and free to the world, including all the source code. It's a relevant search, meaning I would say Google-like. It's not 100% Google-like. Let's just call it somewhere between FedBizOps and Google. But it's a relevant search of FedBizOps, and including the attachments. And that's like the big difference, right? Like the fact that those paragraphs are in those attachments. You can find these keywords now. And that search return, it's an API interface. You're seeing just a simple user interface screen we had here, but this is an API that people can, any company and any person, anybody in a garage somewhere can now start building targeted marketplaces for federal opportunities. We're also going to be adding SBIRs, grants, challenges, all sorts of other data to this because it would be pertinent as well. But a big thanks to the IAE team and the technical team because they're the ones who are adopting this and continuing it and to support it and move it forward. Another one is the SOW library. This was out of many meetings. Essentially, there's an SOW library for the federal government. It goes something like this. When typically on the program side, they need to write an SOW, they usually give it to someone who's somewhat junior or new to the group. And that person, embarrassingly, doesn't really want to ask a lot of questions because they want to seem like they know what to do. And they all go to Google and search FedBizOps, right? And then they find whatever paragraphs there work. So what we wanted to do was a step better than that. So we needed Google's, in this case, a Google-like smart search. So we went off the shelf for that. But in addition, what we wanted to do was also have, when they're searching for these things, we wanted all the agencies to have their own little homes that were publicly searchable, that you could have all the best of show or best of practice statement of works and RFPs. So these are at everyone's fingertips across the agencies. And this tool we love. It's very powerful. It's probably the best named software tool in all of government. Price is paid, and that's really what it is, right? It's price is paid. So this is going to start accumulating data from all sorts of different services. Right now, it has IT and office supplies. But this, for the first time, the procurement community can start to log in to this system while doing market research and actually figure out what the federal government had paid for service for these items in the past, and that would be available to them industry-wide. So I have a long background in IT services, and so I'm very interested in IT services procurement, and particularly because I think the government does a very good job with commodities. Purchasing of commodities, there's not a whole lot of innovation that needs to happen there for big changes, but particularly in IT services, I think there's a need. So I wanted to just get 4 points that I think trends as I see what groups are working on across the country or across the government, and then also some of the things we've noticed. So one of those is use SOOs versus SOWs whenever possible when purchasing. And this is a statement of objectives. And so it's saying agencies, when buying IT services, buy the results, buy a successful delivery of outcomes. Let the vendors pitch to you the way, right? And it's a great way to buy, and it's a great way to write a proposal, and it's an easier way to write a proposal. The next one is big problems need small solutions. I think there's a tendency to think the bigger the problem, the bigger we gotta go. And the reality is the bigger problems are more complex, and because of that, you gotta take it one bit at a time. And then when you add the next little piece and it breaks, you know what broke it, right? It was the last thing you did. And it's very important to just iterate through that, and you'll find that while that may seem slow, you can go very quick. So many small iterations are needed to get the solution right. Big IT projects frequently fail both inside and outside government. It is the nature of those big waterfall projects to fail more frequently than the small agile projects. And those statistics are everywhere. So let's start buying and planning for success. Go with agile. There's my pitch. Hire highly skilled solution architects to work inside the government. And part of this, don't buy IT, buy successful solutions managed by skilled government architects. And what this means is, it doesn't mean you stop outsourcing to get components built, but the best way I could describe it, or heard it described before, is don't outsource the risk. Still take responsibility and the know-how, if you're an agency, of what you're building, and that tool is important to you. And if it's so important, hire and find and recruit the best types of software architects who can deliver on those systems. And the final one is price, quality, speed, pick 3. This is sort of the new reality in software. And it's a different breed of vendors that will increasingly deliver agile, high quality, and cost-effective systems. They're basically, I consider them disruptive, innovative IT service companies, and they're coming to the federal marketplace. And so, as Video described, our world is small, but it's big. We're on RFP Easy, that marketplace. What we are seeing is these companies who never considered doing business with the federal government before because they thought the federal government didn't want to do business with them, right? When we finally got them to the table, they're getting in and they're winning contracts, right? And it doesn't have to be that simplified for them. They just need to know the opportunities there, and they're coming in and they're winning and they're delivering. And that successful delivery, will essentially start becoming ripples that become a giant wave. So thank you very much. That's my time. Appreciate it.
I think we've taken our 45 minutes, but I wondered if there might be 1 or 2 questions we could take quickly. Raise your hand if you have a question.
There's one in the middle.
Oh, right back here.
The gentleman who started, you have the microphone, hello.
Adam, yeah.
Good morning. Hi, Adam. You started off your presentation by noting that about 75% of disease or illness is predictable, manageable, avoidable. But the information then you talked about with Blue Button is all ex post facto. How do you see the tie between that preventability of disease or illness and the work that you're doing with the Blue Button that looks to be more retrospective than forward-looking?
It's a great question, and I think part of what it means to be an engaged patient is having access to all the right information, which might be from a diagnosis that you're dealing with a chronic condition. So I think, in general, chronic conditions make up a big chunk of that 75%. Now, I'm not saying that we're going to be able to then go back and have that chunk of experiences be prevented retrospectively, but I think if we can get a handle on what it means to more effectively manage chronic conditions, I think we take the first step in thinking about disease prevention. So thinking about the primary care level of care rather than the tertiary care level.
Folks are running around with a microphone.
This is a great example of outside-in thinking. How are you, anyone who wants to respond, how are you going to keep that going beyond this one stay in government in this project? How would you recommend moving forward that outside citizen into government innovation?
I think it's a great question. I'll start off, but add in. From our perspective on the inside, I think we see the Presidential Innovation Fellows Program continuing as one piece of it. It was really the vision and the brainchild of Todd Park, and the program now has a home at GSA because the intention is to be able to scale it and sustain the work that's going on in the program over the longer term. We're in planning to bring round 3 of fellows in FY14. So that's one piece of it. A second piece of it is really understanding, I think Greg touched on this, the work that the fellows are currently doing in order to sustain over the long term has to have people outside of the program engaged in it, in its development. We really need to be able to collaborate and partner in the process. And then we create owners in different agencies for these projects, and they have people who are championing them and passionate about the outcomes that they're driving and sustaining those over the longer term. On our end at GSA, we have plans to take several of the projects. We've identified 6 and give them a little bit more seed to take them to to take them down the road, to really further develop the prototypes, test the market, get additional feedback, figure out what some of these things would look like in their next iteration. And so we've made that commitment as well. But I think going back to one of the points that Adam made early on, when you really focus on the user community and engage the user community in developing whatever solution, whether it's digital or not, whether it's a process improvement maybe, rather than necessarily a piece of software, if you've really engaged the user base, you've created an active community that feels a sense of ownership and can help carry these things forward.
Yeah, I just, can everyone hear me? I wanted to just add 2 more points to that. It's a little bit different because Lena can talk best to how it continues inside, and that's exactly what's happening and stuff like that. But I think there's 2 things here. Sort of the classic sense of a democracy is that citizens are engaged. So technically how they can be engaged. Well, you heard about a Open Data project. You talked about ours with FB Open. There's a chance here for citizens now outside for our program to continue that engagement by using all these open APIs, these open data sources, and these open tools. And then that sort of leads to where I think the responsibility of the Presidential Innovation Fellow alumni, right? Like what is our responsibility to continue it? And I think it's twofold. It's to encourage and promote the use of those tools so that people get back engaged. But I also think, so we talked about hiring highly skilled people. We have a responsibility to go out and tell our friends who are working in the commercial world that there's good things happening in government and you should come back in and work, and it just starts, we're part of that solution too. I hope that answers what you were getting at.
Thank you very much for your time this morning. Thank you. I would add one additional thought. I really do hope that what we've talked about here allows, in all of the sessions over the next 2 days, us to stop and really think for a moment about what really is possible for not a lot of money in a short period of time that's really driving towards results.